I'm Robert.
I'm James.
I'm Dawson.
I'm Andrew.
And this is the Adrenaline Factory.
All right, guys, we're back. We're probably a couple days from wrapping up this TL project that we got. It was originally supposed to be a couple-day project, and the more we dug into it, the more that was wrong with it, the more we had to fix. So we're actually in it probably 7 or so full days of work in this thing, I would say. And that's with a couple people on it, so probably realistically 10 to 14 days of working on it. But we've got it just about wrapped up. We're gonna give you guys a once over on it. We're gonna start doing our videos where they're more complete cars, probably one per episode. And obviously sometimes we're gonna jump around because, I mean, that's what we're doing at the shop. Is currently it's me, Jason, Dawson are always working on something. We're gonna show you a little bit later. We got another project Lamborghini kit car in here that we're doing some work on. Dawson's kind of wrapping it up. He's been doing window frame and some other stuff, so we had to cut the body apart, kind of like we did on mine where it's multiple pieces, to get to some things that were never welded and to make some things serviceable that wouldn't have been serviceable before it goes to paint. Obviously you don't want to paint the car and then realize that you got to remove the fender and it's part of the rest of the body. So we're gonna do the guy a favor and put some body lines back in it and make it removable. But to get back on topic, we're gonna walk you through this car. Later on, Jacob is going to put some pictures together and I'm gonna do a voiceover of what the car looked like when it got here and the shape of what it is once it leaves. So what we got is we got the catch can mounted. We welded a tab to the bottom of it because it didn't really have any way of mounting this style. It didn't have any bolts or anything, and we didn't want any clamps over the top of it or anything, so we went ahead and did that, and had Andrew go through and wrinkle coat the areas that we welded to because it pretty much looks the same. So this bracket that we made, we ended up cleaning it up and crinkle coating it. The valve covers, if you watched in any of our previous episodes and you caught it, we found out these were actually magnesium, so we didn't want to go through the trouble to weld them, so we actually just drilled and tapped for these AN to pipe thread fittings to go to here, so we didn't have to weld anything to them. They had these aftermarket plugs and stuff, but I really didn't like how it was here because I feel like if it's on the low side of the cover, and it is venting oil, then that line will get plugged up with oil and it won't vacuum correctly. So it's better to put them up high. That passage does go into here, but if it fills full of oil, then it's not gonna vent correctly. It's gonna always just push that oil into the can instead of being up high where it won't even accumulate oil. So we did that on both sides. We got those routed. We got most of the wiring kind of tucked on it, double checked everything. We actually drilled a hole in this and tapped it for the, this is the clutch reservoir. This car was originally automatic. Before it came to us, that was swapped, but some of this stuff was just kind of crudely mounted, and we'll show you that later on. Also, we mounted the fuse box down here. It was originally like in this area, so the intake wouldn't have been able to be routed through there. We got the Audi coil packs on here. We typically recommend those because they're a really cheap replacement and they're a really high voltage output. So it's a really good upgrade because if you're running an older car, chances are you're gonna have to replace the coils eventually anyway, and these are like 30 bucks a piece. The Honda ones that are even rated to anywhere close to what these will put out are like 130 bucks a piece. So you'll get pretty much all of these for the cost of one of the Honda ones. So it's a no-brainer when it goes to that. We did get the alternator situation figured out. The Honda ECU controls that, and it needs quite a bit of information from it to do it. So we ended up putting a 1K resistor between the field regulator wire and the ignition wire, and that charges it. The ECU is still not happy with the voltage because it's putting out less than, I think it's just barely less than 13 volts, or it's just barely less, I think it's barely less than 14 volts. So we're hoping to get a hold of Fuel Tech today and see if there's a adjustment for that battery light, and we can bring it below that threshold, because that's plenty at idle. It doesn't need anything more than that at idle for what it's doing. So hopefully we can adjust that so it doesn't have an annoying battery light on when it's idling. We've still got a couple issues to work out, which we're not really sure what they are yet, but this motor was built before it came to us, and it's got pretty low oil pressure on cold start and idle. It's still technically above the, so I think factory recommendation is like 10 psi per thousand. Most built motors, they like to see about 15 psi per thousand RPMs. So we're getting right now on cold start, it's like 40 psi, and then once it idles down, it's at like 20. And it's idling pretty close to 1,000 RPMs. So that's just kind of barely above that threshold. Normally, you know, cold start, you'll see 60 psi or so. So I don't know if it's the bearing tolerances in it that are just really open and it needs a way thicker weight oil, or we're gonna explore that a little bit. We're gonna drop the oil pan, check the pickup tube, make sure it's got a good O-ring and stuff on it, and see if we can figure that out. We're just kind of worried. We don't want to run this motor too long and then, you know, him get the car back and then run it for a couple weeks and then it loses oil pressure and kills the built motor that's in here. So we want to address that and make sure nothing's wrong. Also, we've got the fuel tech that we mounted. We kind of moved it. It had a bracket that went through up by the AC vents, and he didn't really like where it was because it was kind of going to block some of that air and stuff. So we moved it down into the center display. He was saying it didn't work anyway. So we were able to actually remove the screen portion of that. We were able to keep that like motherboard that controls the actual AC system separate than the screen. So it'll actually work without the screen being plugged into it. It doesn't need anything from that. So we're able to mount it separately and put that in the area where the screen was. And then we also made a little pedestal. I had Dawson weld it together, and we put it in the lathe and got it all smoothed out to mount the Nano. And it came out pretty cool. It looks kind of like a little flagpole to hold it upright. Then we had to redo some relays. We did an awful lot of wiring on here. They had everything wired from a lot of this stuff into the original system with, they had starter wire in it with a Scotch lock crimp, which is terrible because it cuts the wires and eventually it loses signal or loses power. And one of the problems that we actually started getting when we tried to start it is the starter was cutting in and out, and that's just from, you know, months of them having it together and trying to start the car and not being able to get it to start. That connector had already lost, you know, its voltage across those terminals. It was already loose. So we went ahead and soldered those. We've got to wire one more thing from the fuel tech to the starter relay so we can use it's got like a digital start button that you can put on the fuel tech or on the Nano, and he wanted that so the tuner could actually remotely start the car. So he could just pretty much log in on the computer and remote tune it, and he can start the car and shut it off as he wants to without actually us needing to mess with the key, which is a pretty cool function. So we got the fuel hat done and installed. We finally got it with the fuel level sensor actually working with the fuel tech. Jace was able to call fuel tech and have them work with them about figuring out the voltage ranges and stuff to get that set. We've still got to fine tune it a little bit. What's really neat about the fuel tech is you can actually adjust the voltage output by the resistance levels of the tank. So it does it by gallons. So what we could do is, since the gas tank is a factory one and it changes shape, we can actually configure that the same way through. So it'll actually, even though the same level gaps go all the way up on the sender, it'll know that only this much is changed if the tank is a lot bigger in that section. So it'll actually accurately tell you how many gallons you have based off of what you set it to in the fuel tech, which is kind of neat because normally you end up having like a square tank and it stays the same amount per, you know, that gap in there. But this will work better if you have a tank that's not the same shape. You can set those resistance values as you want by putting, you know, a gallon or so in at a time and resetting that that voltage output. All right guys, so what we're gonna do now is I'm going to have Jacob post some of these before and after pictures for you guys, and then I'm just gonna do a quick voiceover, and then you guys can really see what it looked like before, what it looks like now, and just kind of how much it's come together over the last few months. We're starting off with this one because this one's the most important. What we got is, with the standalone, we needed a single tooth trigger on the cam gear, and it had already been done, but we were having issues with it, so we went ahead and pulled it off and saw this. It had been dug up with a grinder, and in pulling this apart, we ended up noticing that the keyway was actually broken off in there, so it wasn't even aligned on time like it should have been. So we opted for getting another gear, and then we ended up putting it in the mill and facing the rest of these teeth off to make it a minus count, just a single. Now on this one, we got this fuel return system that we noticed he had vented the return line to the top hat of the fuel tank, which was actually the vent, which in some cases isn't a bad idea, but you have to have a vent somewhere, which there wasn't, and this one actually still had the check valve in it, so this one wouldn't have worked at all. Looking into it farther, there's actually a machine screw holding this, I think it's just a O-ring style slip fitting for here, and basically it was dug up pretty bad on there on how it was installed. It was never going to seal, and the screw was going through the side of the housing, so it ended up leaking through there also. So we ended up just putting a piece of rubber hose on it and hard lining it through the factory clips, and just basically making it back into a vent. On the fuel, inside the tank lines, you're supposed to have like a submersible fuel line. This one was actually a PTFE line, which shouldn't even be used with a clamp, still steel braided, and it was actually just stuck on there with a worm gear clamp, so I don't think this would have held at all. Actually, the other end of it didn't even have a clamp on it at all and was just shoved on there. But this is what we opted for, was making a whole new fuel basket here. It was just a better idea, plus he was having issues with the stock fuel sending unit anyway, so we went ahead and bought a universal fuel level sensor and made the return and the feed through the top hat like it should be. It's just overall, it's going to be a way better setup that way. Here's the finished product of it. We've got the double clamps on there. It's holding the level sensor and it's holding the pump. If you guys have done stuff like this before, you know that this is a very important part, is you cannot make these clamps very tight because those pumps are not designed to be clamped that way. So this is actually, there's very little tension on that pump at all. It's just enough to pretty much hold it in place. So we kept that in mind when building it. This is the finished product here, fully installed. Everything fit right, so it was good to go. Basically, the next couple are just going to be just kind of some crappy wiring, stuff not covered, not shielded, not soldered, grounds installed through paint with sheet metal screws, butt connectors, wires all different lengths. This is pretty much the finished product here. We got a couple things to tidy up, but not too crazy in here. All right, guys, well, that's it for this one. Be sure to check us out next week. We're going to be going more in depth in some of these builds. We know you guys want to see kind of what we're doing all the time here at the factory. So take care.